Hello, one. Hello, all. Mr. Silver's coming back at you for Monday, September 7th. That's today's date. And we are ready to start our second and final week of Ancient Civilizations. A few updates. You have your first unit exam, which is going to go over everything we've gone over on our first 2 weeks this Friday on the 11th. So be on the lookout for that. Thursday is going to be reserved as a study day for you. So if you are in second, fourth, or sixth period, you can log on to our Google Meet, our meet that we have scheduled every Tuesday and Thursday. So the Thursday before our exam, you can log in and we will go over some example questions. I'm not saying that they are questions from the exam. I'm not saying that they aren't questions from the exam. I'm just saying you might want to log on to that Google Meet. And if you are in first period or fifth period, same thing for that Wednesday. We'll go over a little bit about the Persian Empire on Wednesday, and then we'll do some review questions if you're in first or fifth period. So what I want to talk about today, first off, I realized that my video on Friday ran a little bit long, so I'm going to try to keep this one on the short side. It's going to be similar to that one. It's going to be another empire that we need to talk about. There's this will be the third empire that we talk about. There's 4 total that we need to talk about. The first one was Babylon. The second one is going to be was Egypt. Today is going to be the Assyrian Empire, and we're going to talk about the Persians on Wednesday. So for right now, I just want to jump straight into it. I want to keep this video on the shorter side because I do realize that I ran over time on Friday. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and jump straight into our PowerPoint. Remember, I'm not going to do PowerPoints 2 days in a row. So tomorrow it will be something different. Wednesday, we will be doing the Persian Empire. And like I've said, the PowerPoint, the slides, whatever you want to say, it's a really good way to get a lot of information out there so that you can see what I'm saying and you can hear me while I'm saying it. But again, I'm not going to do it for 2 days in a row. So tomorrow will be something a little bit different. We're going to do some scenarios, some what-if games, and then we'll be back on slides on Wednesday for the Persian Empire. And then Thursday will be a review day, and Friday will be the test. So let's talk about the Assyrians. Of course, like always, let's go over our objectives. Our objectives for today. So if we are able to answer these 3 questions by the end of this lesson, we will say that we have done a good job and we have learned. So why were the Assyrians so successful? The Assyrians were a very successful empire during this time. They were the kings of 800 BC to 600 BC. Absolutely nobody even came close. So how did they get there? How did they treat their subjects? How were the people in the Assyrian Empire treated? And then finally, what caused the fall of the Assyrian Empire? So what caused the Assyrians to fall? So that's some of the things we're going to be going over today. Those are our objectives to be able to answer those questions. First, let's look at where the Assyrian Empire was located. And so you can see here, we went over on Friday, we went over the Egyptian Empire, which is about here in this area. It bordered the Red Sea a little bit, came out to here. It's where modern day Egypt is too. It's right there. Egypt has not moved. You can see Egypt right there. So remember, in BC, we go the opposite way that we do today. So today we go 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021. That's how years work. And in BC, they work backwards. So it would go 824 BC, then the next year would be 823 BC. So they count down until you get to 0, and then they go back up. And that's when BC stops. So these dotted lines over here, this is the Assyrian Empire and where it's going to start in about 824 BC. That is when the Assyrian Empire is really going to come around. And less than 200 years later, which I know sounds like a long time, but when we talk about world history, 200 years actually isn't that long of a time, especially when we talk about this long ago. All of a sudden, the Assyrian Empire is this big. It has expanded. It's over into Egypt. It's taken some of Egypt's land, the Sumerian land, Babylonian land. It's taken a lot of land from empires that have fallen. So how they get this done? So here's what the Assyrians did. They looked around them and they realized everybody around us is weak. Egypt is weak. Mesopotamia is weak. Babylon's weak. Everybody around us is weak. Why don't we start attacking? And that's what they did. So they become the sea people. They become the sea people. They build boats that can attack, that can get them across the Red Sea, that can get them across the Mediterranean, that can get them anywhere they need to go so that they can start conquering new land. And that's what they're going to do. So they are the military powerhouse of this period. So they take no prisoners. They come in. They are there to take your land. They're not there to ask for it. They're not there to remove you. They're there to take the land. All right? So you can either retreat or go to battle. Those are your only two options. There's no surrender. They are not going to take you as a prisoner. They're there to take your land. They have organized foot soldiers, chariots, archers. Remember we talked about on Friday that Egypt wasn't the perfect place to start a civilization because it was protected by desert and water, and there was so much fertile soil in Egypt because of the Nile. But what they didn't have was iron, which put them way behind in making weapons, but they didn't think they needed weapons. And they didn't until the Assyrians came. And that's when they realized that they don't have weapons to fight the Assyrians, and that's how the Assyrians took Egyptian land. They have year-round soldiers, so soldiers that are fighting year-round instead of just seasonally. Even when winter comes around, they're still fighting. And then they use slaves to do their manual labor. So they invent new techniques for breaking into cities. So walls aren't going to help you against the Assyrians because they have a battering ram, which nobody's ever seen before. Nobody knew that a battering ram could even be built to knock down a wall. That had never been thought of before. Tunneling under walls, they know how to do that. They've built machines that can do that. They've built a ladder. Nobody had thought of a ladder before, and a ladder that can climb over the wall. There's nothing that's going to be able to stop you from the Assyrians taking over if you are not prepared for it, which especially the Egyptians were not. So here are some of the strategies that they use, not just the things that they invented and the techniques, but they were very concerned about their reputation. So they were very concerned about the way other people saw them, because if you're scared of us because you've heard of the things that we've done and the things that we will do, you're probably not going to put up a fight. You might just leave your land and let us have it. So they used intimidation. They wanted their stories told. They would leave survivors. They wouldn't take prisoners, but they'd leave survivors who could go tell the tale of how horrible the Assyrians are, so that the next time they come, people will just leave. They would loot cities. They would raid cities. Sometimes they wouldn't take the land. They would just take your stuff and take it back to their land. And they imposed heavy taxes on new subjects in the empire. So sometimes they would take land and they would allow the people in the land, if they didn't put up a fight, to become part of the Assyrian Empire. However, with that, they were heavily, heavily taxed to the point that they could barely survive. So they immediately became lower class citizens, barely enough money and food to survive, barely enough to live off of, horrible lives, but at least they were alive. So the Assyrian government was an absolute monarchy, which is going to survive. That's going to be a government system that survives for a long time, not just in the Assyrian Empire, but in Western Europe when we get to talk about them. North America despises the absolute monarchy. That's what's going to start the American Revolution. But we'll talk about all of that when we get there. But an absolute monarchy is a king who makes all the decisions with no checks on his power. He answers only to one person, one entity, and that is God or their gods. So the king is a direct line through God, a lot like the Pharaoh, except there's no separation of power underneath him. He just makes all the rules. And remember, one of the reasons that the Egyptian empire fell is because priests and nobles and viziers were contradicting the words of the Pharaoh, and it created a lot of rifts in the government. In the Assyrian government, that's not going to be an issue because there's only one person making the laws. So this is actually going to work pretty well. The Assyrians are one of the first people to actually be able to govern a large area effectively because there's only one person making the rules. He makes it for everybody. So there's not a disparity. There's not a difference between what this person's doing, what this household's doing, what this region's doing. Everybody's doing the same thing because only one person's making the rules. The tax revenue was used on the military and expanding the empire. That's what they used the taxes on. Mainly the military and maintaining the empire. It's more so expanding the empire through the military. So the tax revenue was used largely on the military, almost exclusively. And they built an extensive library. That's another thing about the Assyrians is we get to talk about them in this class because they wrote a lot of their stuff down. We have records of what they did, what they thought, what they believed, because they built an extensive library, kept records, and now we, as historians, if you're in this class, you are a historian now, congratulations, at least for our purposes, we get to study them because of the record keeping that they did, which was amazing for their time, especially. So now we're going to talk about what led to the decline of the Assyrians. So how does this great empire that's kicking down doors and taking land whenever they want to, the only military powerhouse of the period, how does that empire fall by the wayside? How does it fall? What led to its decline? And the answer is they did too much. They went overboard. They expanded their territory to a point that they could not manage it anymore. So they were the first ones to be able to effectively manage a large empire, but when it became too large, they couldn't quite keep everybody under control. There's one person making all the laws, and if you don't like that person, if you don't like the king, if you don't believe in the same gods as that king, it's gonna really negatively impact your perception and how you feel about the government. So civil wars are going to arise in the Assyrian Empire that the government can't keep down because there's too many of them. And then the Persians, who we're going to talk about on Wednesday, are going to emerge from the east. So if you remember from the map, the Assyrians are kind of in the Middle East and North Africa. And then further east, so out toward Asia, the Persians are going to emerge, and they are going to present a big issue for the Assyrians that's going to lead to their eventual decline. So short answer, they did too much too fast, and that's how they fell. So let's revisit the questions from the beginning of the lesson. Our three objectives, our three questions that we wanted to be able to answer. Why were the Assyrians so successful? And that's going to be because of their military. Their military strategy made them successful, and the fact that they had a military at all is going to make them successful, because during this period, people were growing their own civilizations and empires. They weren't really worried about what other people were doing, and the Syrians were the first ones to look around and say, all of this is ripe for the taking. Let's go take it. And that's what they did. How did the Assyrians treat their subjects? So they conquered cruelly. They didn't take prisoners. They left some survivors to tell the tale of how awful they were. And they imposed heavy taxes if they did allow you to stay in the empire. So they treated their subjects very, very poorly, cruelly, and with heavy taxes. What caused the Assyrians to fall? Short answer, they did too much too fast, and they could not manage their own growth. So the empire is going to become too large. There's going to be rebellion, civil war. People don't like the king. And then eventually we're going to talk about the Persian invasion on Wednesday. But until then, you are done for the day as long as you complete that Google form that is on the Google Classroom page. Once you finish watching the video, go fill out the form, or fill out the form while you watch the video. Again, that is entirely up to you. If you want to see me during my office hours are 1:15 to 3 o'clock, Monday through Friday. Anytime, email me. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. concerns. But if you are all set, if you've done the Google form for today, do make sure that you go to Infinite Campus and mark yourself as present for all 6 of your classes, including mine, so that you don't get marked absent. And if you have done all of those things, then I guess I will see you tomorrow, Tuesday, at 8:30. So until then, later, Wildcat.